Introduction. Consent is a topic we hear a lot about these days. Or so you might think. But that's just an illusion. A search through Google's data reveals quite a different reality. American books that examined consent peaked sharply around the time our Constitution was written. Discussion of consent has declined steadily ever since. Studying Google's data in more detail shows another interesting pattern. American authors are less and less interested in discussing our consent to who governs us and to how we are governed. Consent to medical treatment or to sex, on the other hand, is discussed with increasing frequency. Focusing the issue of consent so narrowly onto our bodies is probably why we think we contemplate the meaning of consent more than we really do. This lack of focus on the nature of consent seems strange in a nation founded on the principle that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. What is consent really? The dictionary defines consent as what occurs when one person voluntarily agrees to the proposal or desires of another. So far, so good. But to truly give consent, voluntary agreement is not all we need now, is it? For consent to be genuine, it must be given by a person who has a clear appreciation and understanding of the facts, implications, and future consequences of the proposed action. We start to see where the problems begin when it dawns on us just how complex a world we live in. Our appreciation of all the implications and future consequences of our decisions is never clear. To some extent, all of our decisions are guesses. We all have our regrets in life because sometimes we guess wrong. But that's just the start. We are often asked for our consent by others who are concealing what we really need to know to choose wisely. This doesn't just happen with sex or with medical care. It happens in our public life too. A politician or journalist keeping important information secret. A bureaucrat concealing the rules Americans are compelled to obey amid masses of impenetrable text. A snack food manufacturer hiding addictive or harmful ingredients in our food. A lawyer hiding critical information from the jury. A Supreme Court justice concealing weak reasoning by tortuous logic and long strings of bogus precedents. A scientist publishing research that cannot be replicated. A teacher indoctrinating a naive student. Then there's the issue of persuasion. Persuaders often misdirect our attention until the facts we really need to consider are hidden in plain sight. They can do this because of influence techniques that have been sharpened for thousands of years. In modern times, these techniques have been developed into a science, allowing those who use them to sell more goods, get more votes, make more money, or attract more lovers. As persuasion becomes more effective, the persuader can convince others to do, think, say, or buy ever more of what he wants us to do, think, say, or buy. The will of the persuader counts for more and more. Our own will counts for less and less. What would happen if persuasion becomes nearly infinite in its effectiveness, able to convince almost anyone to do almost anything? If that were to become a reality, our own will would become negligible. Consent would become meaningless. That brings us to the two observations that are the basis of this novel. First, that persuasion has rules, much like a game. Second, in games with clear rules such as chess, checkers, or Go, computers have mastered the strategies that arise from the rules. Today's game-playing machines are vastly more powerful than even the greatest human players. That invites a question. What happens when machines can master the persuasion game the way they've dominated chess? With that kind of mastery, how much power will the owners and operators of those machines gain? The answer, supplied by logic and reason, is this: nearly unlimited power. Given that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, how far would those who have that nearly unlimited power push it? The answer supplied by a clear-eyed look at human history is this: as far as they can possibly push it. In this book, you are about to inhabit a world in which a technology with that kind of power has become a reality. Can those in pursuit of that power be stopped? That is the question that we will explore. Before we begin, a bit of housekeeping. All of the corporations in this book are fictitious. All of the characters are fictitious. All of the politicians in this book are fictitious. The comic book heroes Raven and Lenore are characters in a fictitious comic book series. They are discussed but never really described in the narrative. The only resemblance that they have to the DC comic book character Raven is the name. Their only relevance to the plot is their effect on their actors and fans. All of the federal laws specifically named in the book are real. I fudged it a bit with some of the state laws, election procedures, and the jobs of election officials. I was careful to limit myself to creating fictitious laws, procedures, and jobs that sounded plausible, at least to me. Some geography is fudged a bit too. All of the artworks described in this book are real, except for those made by the fictitious artist Florencio Alvarez. I encourage you to have a look at them if you're curious. It will add to the reading experience. Finally, in the world you are about to share with me, there has been no COVID-19 pandemic. Plotting a book with several different ensembles of characters that all meet up at the end has been complicated enough. There was no need for a pandemic to complicate things further. With all that out of the way, let's have an adventure together. Preamble. The Oval Office. 20 days before Election Day. White House Chief of Staff Shelley Roberts eased open the door of the Oval Office and peeked in. President Josiah Baird was sitting alone in one of the pair of beige sofas. His suit jacket and tie were thrown haphazardly onto the other sofa, and his white dress shirt was open at the collar. The shirt had bloused out of his pants long ago. She wondered why she ever bothered to help him tuck it in. A half-eaten bowl of melting ice cream was on the coffee table in front of him. Shelley had been detained longer than she had expected by meetings with cabinet members, campaign strategists, and military leaders. Now she was in a big hurry. A telephone meeting between the president and Jerry Neville was scheduled for 1:30 that afternoon. It was her job to make sure that the president was on the phone precisely on time. She had only minutes to spare. Even still, she did not want to risk bursting in and surprising the president. He startled easily, and it took several minutes for him to regain his composure after being startled. As she rounded the couch, she stepped on a spoon dripping with ice cream residue, staining the carpet. One more item for her to-do list. She gently greeted her silver-haired boss, informing him of his upcoming meeting. The president just smiled at her. Realizing that she could not afford to wait for the president to react, she bent down and took hold of the president under each of his arms. Her considerable bulk helped her lift the emaciated president out of the couch. When he was finally standing, she escorted him to his seat behind the resolute desk, where he would take his phone call. She had to work quickly because Jerry Neville became very impatient when he was kept waiting. Neville would probably be very short of patience in any case, but if he were kept waiting, he would be positively explosive. The phone began to ring while the president had 24 of his small, mincing steps left to go. Shelley didn't want to risk letting go of the president to pick up the phone. She would have to stay with him as the phone continued to ring. Shelley tried to control her nearly panicked breathing as the president approached the desk. Supporting him tightly against her massive torso with a fleshy arm, she rolled out the desk chair and eased him into it. Then she pressed the button on the speakerphone. She got a dial tone. She buzzed the president's secretary to ask her to get Neville back on the phone. It was going to be a long afternoon. Standing behind the president's desk chair, Shelley drummed her fingers on the backrest as she waited for the secretary to reconnect to Neville. When the electronic warble of the phone finally resumed, Shelley punched the answer button on the first ring. "You don't take my calls anymore," Neville demanded. "Good afternoon, Mr. Neville. It's good to speak with you. On the line with us is the President of the United States." President Berridge, recognizing his cue, cut in. "Good afternoon, sonny boy." "What the hell is going on, Berridge?" Neville barked. "What?" President Berridge asked, puzzled. "That's a very vague question, Mr. Neville," Shelley said as pleasantly as she could. "Perhaps you could be a bit more specific." "I understand this is a special situation and that I'm going to have special responsibilities in this election. But do you have to make this harder than it has to be?" "You know, Jerry," said the president, "my mother always told me—" "I don't have any time to talk about your goddamn mother!" "Watch your tone, Mr. Neville," Shelley warned. Remember that you're speaking to the President of the United States.
Am I now?
Neville shouted.
Without my help, he won't be president much longer, and you'll be back to teaching critical body positivity studies at Podunk University out in the middle of bumfudge nowhere!
We're all very grateful for your help, Mr. Neville.
If you're so goddamn grateful, why the hell didn't you give Barrage's meds before talking to me?
Mr. Neville, we need to be very careful with President Barrage's pharmaceutical treatments. Dr. Russell has limited his doses to once per day. The moropretin injections only produce 2 or 3 hours of lucidity. President Barrage has a campaign speech tonight. We're reserving today's dose for that. Is there something maybe I can help you with?
Fine,
Neville grumbled.
Take me off speaker. I don't need the cutter interrupting us.
Shelley picked up the telephone handset and squeezed herself between the armrests of the chair that sat beside the president's desk. Can we talk calmly? She implored.
Have you seen the damn polls?
Yes. All the polls say we're winning easily.
No, I don't mean the bullshit polls that get broadcast on the news. I mean the real polls. Have you seen them?
We're just as concerned as you are, Mr. Neville.
Are you now?
We most certainly are.
Then what was it he said last night at the Ohio rally? Something about white people needing to get used to sitting in the passenger seat?
Mr. Neville, our party is attempting to appeal to a diverse coalition of voters. I think what the president was saying,
your opponent is filling stadiums with cheering crowds, and you can't stop Barrage from insulting half your voters in front of his joyless loyalists? The more stupidity like this, the more states I'm going to have to solidify for you. We still haven't quite washed off the stink of the last election.
Are you saying we're going to lose?
No. We've registered enough immigrant voters, so I think I can get my arms around most of the battlegrounds. But Indiana has gone back to paper ballots. That makes things harder.
We'll have more campaign rallies in Indiana. Shore up the state.
Like freaking hell you will.
We have an election to win.
You actually think you could win this, don't you? I'm not asking you to win. I'm asking you to lose by less. And leave the rest to me. I thought at least that would be a reasonable request. Something even you could pull off. And you're not even capable of that.
President Barrage did very well in the debates. All the networks are gushing over his performance.
The only people who believe that are your tribe of party above all loyalists. Most of the country aren't loyalists to either party. They don't care that much about politics. The media and my social media platforms can help to paint a picture of the two candidates for those who aren't paying much attention. With the media on our side, that extra help gives us close to half the country. But you can't lose too much of the rest and still hope to stay elected.
We've been very strategic in our campaign advertisements. Our voter registration and get-out-the-vote programs are second to none.
How much do you people believe all the media happy talk? With all the crime, the inflation, the unstable international situation, need I go on?
What do you think we need to do, Mr. Neville?
You know, this whole goddamn thing got so much harder when you got greedy in the last cycle, said Neville, coming down from his rage and graduating into an exhausted exasperation.
Greedy? Ambassador Shen Hong assured us.
I don't want any of your goddamn excuses. The situation is the situation. The fact is that you did too much with those Chi-Com chips. Need I list the states that changed their laws, making it impossible for your Chinese chips to work their magic again?
There's no need for that, Mr. Neville.
I told you back then, I fucking told you. Enhanced the performance in a couple of important states. People expected Barrage to win the last election, but nobody was expecting a 40-state landslide. What did he tell me on election night? Something about needing a mandate?
President Barrage's progressive goals for America needed the kind of clear mandate that can only be achieved with the landslide. His policies were a departure from the way America has always conducted its politics and its business.
Yeah, but what's it I always tell you? You can only be greedy if you aren't greedy. And you got greedy!
Our legislative agenda is a success. We have passed legislation on every aspect of American political and economic life. You would be the last person I would think needs reminding about that.
Yeah, but what did it get you? People got skeptical of the election. Audits, recounts, conspiracy theories. And now they're watching this election like freaking hawks. it got us a sweeping legislative agenda. It also got you lawsuits requiring the states to clean up their voter rolls. So, what do we do? Ultimately, if you want to stay in power, what you need to do is to reduce the number of people necessary to keep you in power. Saddam only needed a few dozen people to keep him in power in Iraq. He kept losing wars, but he outlasted, 4 American presidents? We have an election to win. For that, we need half the country to keep us in power. In the last election, you got into office with less than half the people voting for you. This time, you'll probably do worse. But if we can manage something in Indiana, you'll stay in office. Do you have something you can manage in Indiana? Yeah. The only bright spot is that this is the last goddamn one of these we have to worry about. We only need a year before the Prometheus system comes online on a mass scale. Then you won't have to make the voters happy to stay in power. You'll have to make me happy. What if we lose? Can you do something for us in the next cycle? I doubt it. Your opponent has made George Garrett his running mate. That's got trouble written all over it. And that means trouble for you, too. That is why you have to lose by as little as possible this time. You get me? Yeah. We've got a serious situation, Shelley. I'll get it sorted out, just like you always make me do. But I'd really wish you'd make these things easy on me for a change. There was a click. Neville's end of the line went silent.
Article 1. Epigraph. One need only watch totalitarians at work to see that once men gain power over other men's minds, that power is never used sparingly or wisely, but lavishly and brutally and with unspeakable results. E.B. White. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Thomas Jefferson, U.S. Declaration of Independence. There came up the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words. And David heard them. 1 Samuel 17:23, King James Version. Article 1, Section 1. Apartment, Indianapolis suburbs, 3 years before Election Day.
We're hacking people! We're hacking people! Jonathan Hall shouted as he burst into the room.
Kevin Judd's desk chair squeaked as he turned slowly away from his computer screen to regard his smiling roommate. Hall was usually animated. Standing at the doorway of Kevin's cramped bedroom, he was a typhoon of twitching excitement.
You've got to come see this! Get your jacket! We're going to campus!
Kevin returned the can of glowing green soft drink that he was sipping to the damp but otherwise uncluttered half of his desk. That was where he kept his snacks and drinks. He pulled his soft, thin frame from the stained and tattered chair. Several comic book action figures and video game controllers were sprawled among the piles of filthy laundry and the uneaten remains of takeout meals. Kevin ambled past the mess into the surprisingly well-kept living room of the apartment he shared with Hall. Hall, so excited that he omitted the customary reminder for his roommate to tidy up, beckoned Kevin to the door. Kevin found his coat and followed his roommate into the afternoon sunlight and into the bulky green junker that Hall had for a car. Hall and Kevin had been sharing the off-campus apartment ever since one of their previous escapades made Hall unwelcome in the dorms. An issue of the now defunded humor magazine that Hall had published and the letter-writing campaign that followed created the uproar. Many students were enraged that Hall's campaign had resulted in the controversial decision by the administration to disinvite an acclaimed speaker who would address the class from his cell on death row. As they arrived on campus, Hall pulled the hood of his sweatshirt over his mop of blonde hair to avoid being recognized by the protesting radicals. Kevin was not impressed. Come on, we knew that our letter would piss these guys off. Besides, they never need much of an excuse to riot.
You don't notice, do you? What's in their hands?
Kevin peered out the car window. Then he saw it. Clenched in the fists of many of the protesters were letters written on Harvard University's own letterhead. Kevin turned to Hall and smiled. Hall pointed back out the window.
Look at their signs!
he managed to get out before being consumed by laughter. Kevin began to laugh too. The phrases on the placards that many of the protesters were carrying were phrases straight from the letter that had brought the crowd to the streets. The pair didn't have to read that letter to know just what it said. They had written the letter themselves. It was on Harvard University's letterhead, signed by the auto pen of Lois Dalloway, Harvard University's president, and sent from the university's own mailroom. The previous year, some administrator had clicked a link in the phishing email that Kevin had sent to the university's entire administration. Once the link was clicked, Kevin and Hall had access to the university's servers. They could now send out messages that looked like they came from the university's administration. When crowds protesting the prisoners' disinvitation denounced the decision as racist, they emphasized their point by destroying numerous statues that had adorned the campus since its founding. Thaddeus Harwood's bronze likeness was pulled down. The word racist was spray-painted onto its pedestal. In response to the rioting that had engulfed the campus, the administration sent letters to the student body thanking the rioters for their courage in expressing themselves in the language of the unheard and calling for justice against racism and white supremacy. Hall didn't count on the university administration to respond appropriately to the smashing of the inheritance bequeathed to the current administration by the university's founders. If he didn't write an appropriate response in the university's name, no appropriate response would ever be written at all. Before they could send out snail mail letters to the university's mailing list and on university letterhead, they would need to access the university's mailroom. That was more difficult than accessing the main server. Kevin had prepared a thumb drive containing special code that would allow the duo to get the printers printing, the envelope stuffers stuffing, and the stamp machine sticking stamps onto those filled envelopes. Only then could appropriate letters make it to the right mailboxes. A quick trip to the mailroom, decoy package in hand, was enough for them to find an unguarded computer terminal. Checking to make sure they were not seen, Hall quietly slipped Kevin's special thumb drive into an appropriate port and left. That accomplished, all they had to do was decide on what to write. Dear students, alumni, and parents, Harwood University is pleased to honor the country whose freedoms and prosperity have made our university and its mission of lifelong learning possible. In response to the wanton destruction of university property, our faculty and administrators have decided to recommit to honoring our heritage by honoring the discovery, the founding, and the preservation of our great American Union, with a statue garden dedicated to Columbus, Washington, and Lincoln. We are interviewing sculptors at the moment. You may expect brochures of their proposals to be distributed for our university family to vote on the most moving tributes to these great men. Very truly yours, Lois Dalloway. Watching the crowd hold up signs with messages such as, "The American Union was never great," "The destruction of racism is never wanton," or "No honoring a heritage of hate," greatly entertained the duo. Hall was especially amused by the green-haired woman bearing the sign, "No men are great." "It's like they're dancing to our tune," he said. No sooner had he said that than a black-clad figure mounted the pedestal where Thaddeus Harwood's statue once stood. He was wearing black combat boots, and he had 3 golden stripes on the right sleeve of his black hooded sweatshirt. In contrast to the skinny 30-something baristas that made up most of the crowd, this man had the solidly built shape of a fire hydrant. Around him, protesters, most of them too old still to be in college, waved flags with the logo of Anti-Ra, the Anti-Racist Brigade. The group was an import from 1920s Germany. It was created under the sponsorship of Joseph Stalin to fight against Stalin's political opponents in the streets of Berlin and other German cities. While their ostensible mission was to fight against the street thugs of Hitler's National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Anti-Rassistische Brigade directed most of its combat efforts against the supporters of the liberal Weimar Republic that governed Germany. The liberals are far softer targets than Hitler's bully boys, and Stalin figured that the best time to take on Hitler's street fighters was after Germany's fragile liberal democracy had been destroyed. There, in the ashes of the once free republic, the totalitarian ideologies could fight it out for ultimate power. Pounding his fist into the palm of his left hand, the man shouted to the crowd, "You made your voices heard when you spoke out in anger at the systemic silencing of black and brown voices. You showed the racists on this campus how you feel, and now the racist administration of this campus is planning to honor white supremacy by blighting this campus with bronze images of oppression." Kevin saw some of the crowd members picking up stones and chunks of pavement. He pointed it out to Hall. "Now they're dancing to his tune," Kevin said. Hall stopped laughing. It was time to get off campus before the crowd surrounded his car. He headed for the exit, but not before a chunk of thrown pavement crashed against his windshield, sending a spider web of cracks in all directions. That night, the peaceful protest that came to take exception to the statue letter became mostly peaceful. Fires were set in dumpsters, windows were smashed, the classrooms and lecture halls in the Anderson building were vandalized. This is Ari Mendelson. I hope you're enjoying Consent. I'd love it if you could show your appreciation for my years of hard work by hitting that like button and subscribing to my channel. But why keep this adventure to ourselves? I wrote Kingmaker because I believe its message of keeping control of our own minds is one that America needs to hear. Young men especially will profit from learning the message that lies at the heart of these novels, that the straightest path to happiness is by improving yourself, one step at a time, rather than attempting to change others. So, share this audiobook far and wide across your favorite social platforms. See the description below for other ways for you to support my work. Thank you so much for your time and attention.